us to begin our studies this morning. Good to see everybody here. Glad you're here. I look forward to our studies. I don't know of any difference about this sick. I think everybody's about the same. Miss Flossie's doing a little better, Tony tells me this morning. And so for that, we're grateful. I hadn't heard anything any different about anybody. So let's keep those in our thoughts and prayers, those that are shut in, and of course those that give them care. I'll check on today. I'll check on several and see how they're doing. Make sure that they're still doing okay. But let's remember all of them. I would ask you to bow. And Mike, how about leading us in a word of prayer?
Father in heaven, I'm so thankful and blessed for the midnight's rest. I'm thankful for another beautiful Lord's Day. I'm thankful to come to this building and come out this Sunday morning, worship Thee in this Bible study. We pray to be with all our teachers this morning, the things they prepare to present them in a way that we easily understand. And we'll be as good listeners, and we'll take the things and apply them and help us to be better Christians. We pray, Father, for a good health. I'm thankful for it. We pray, Father, that You'll be with us as long as we're living on this earth. We'll have a good health. We can continue to do the things and serve you. We pray for all those who are sick, those who especially shut in for long periods of time. We pray for them. We pray for Your comfort them. Be with all those and be Thy will, heal them of their illnesses. Be with us through this service, through our future lives. Thank you for Christ and what He's done for us. We're so thankful for Thy mercy and Thy grace that we have in need each and every day. Give us first singing, Father, and ask thanks. In Christ's name we pray.
Amen. All right, we're on Philippians 2, verse 25, and it's there we're talking about Epaphroditus. There's about 5 things that's said about Epaphroditus in this particular verse. What things are said about him that's very noteworthy? What's the first thing it said? Maybe I get you started with that.
He's a fellow worker.
All right, he's a fellow worker. And obviously he, along with Paul, he was working with Paul. And actually he was sent by the church at Philippi, wasn't he? And of course, obviously they selected him. He obviously was one that was a person of integrity, or I don't think that they probably would have selected him. But they knew the kind of person that he was, and they selected him, and they sent him on the effort to go and to minister to Paul. And so we can see then of something good that was said about Epaphroditus. We notice what his name meant, and of course it was connected to Aphrodite, which would be a false deity or false god. And we talked a little bit about that Wednesday night. There's not much we know about that, but the name also means charming, and so it doesn't necessarily mean that he had some sort of connection with a false deity or false god, though his parents could have, or even his grandparents could have. We just don't know. Every word study that I have, at least on my computer and in my library, didn't mention anything about any connection or ties to his parents or his grandparents worshiping a false deity or a false god. But yet we can... that may well have been the case, but we simply don't know. Or it might have just been a name that was selected, a common name, and of course that meant charming. And as far as a person goes, obviously he was an extremely charming person because of the kind of individual that he was. And you can see that, as you said, as Claudia talked about a fellow worker, the first thing that's said about him was what? He's a brother. What does it mean to be a brother? Close, all right. Closeness, when you're usually talking about a brother or sister. What? All right, this would be a brother in Christ. And so obviously then there's a relationship that was enjoyed, and to be a part of a spiritual family. Do you think we take that sometimes for granted, that we have such a wonderful spiritual family? I think we probably take that a little bit for granted. Traveling sometimes, it's hard to find a spiritual family to meet with and to worship with sometimes in some parts, even of this country that you may go. Particularly you go up north and you go northwest, and there their churches are few and far between, I'm going to tell you, to find places to worship and to serve. In Minnesota, where I go out and hold meetings out there in a little town called St. Charles, there's not another group relatively close by other than Rochester, and they just have a handful at Rochester and a handful there at St. Charles, and that's it for miles. And sometimes people come down, they call it the cities, and which would be Minneapolis, St. Paul. But there are two large congregations in Minneapolis, St. Paul, and so they travel down, and actually some of the members come down from the cities and preach there at St. Charles some, and at Rochester as well. But you take that for granted of not having having opportunity that we can assemble together. We're very blessed in this area, particularly. This is called the Bible Belt, obviously, and it's called that for a reason. And you have a number of Christians. But the sad thing is the numbers have deteriorated in a lot of churches, have gone down, and churches that once were there are not there anymore. You know, that's kind of the sad thing. But then other churches have grown and prospered. But here he's a brother, and of course he talked about him being a brother in Christ. What's the difference between a fellow worker and a fellow soldier? All right, a career out of it. That's a good way to look at it, I suppose. Charles?
A soldier is somebody who puts their life on the line.
All right. And really carries with it the ideal of battles to be fought. And certainly it was that. Was Paul's life one of a soldier for Christ? Well, it was, wasn't it? And really that's what he says of Epaphroditus as well. Was he near death for the cause of Christ? Well, yeah, that's what this text is saying and pointing out. And so not only does he call him a fellow worker, but he's a fellow soldier. And then he says he's your messenger. Now, the word messenger there is the same word that's some places obviously translated apostle. And messenger would be simply one sent. And I don't think he's talking about him being a messenger or an apostle from the standpoint that he was an apostle like Paul was. But he was simply one that would have been sent. He was sent from Philippi, and he was a person that was delivering a message or delivering the necessary financial help to supply Paul's needs at this time. And so he was a messenger sent from them. Any thoughts about those? Yes. Don, I'm sorry, Don. Yeah. Yeah. Affairs of this world. Yeah. And he tells him no soldier who is willing to fight a battle entangles himself with the things of this world. And actually, my understanding of a Roman soldier would be the fact that they didn't want someone that was even married. They didn't want anybody that would entangle themselves with the affairs of this life, and so that they could give their services totally to Caesar and fight Caesar's battles. And and it kind of carries with it that idea. Not that he's forbidding marriage, obviously, but it's the fact that we don't get entangled ourselves with the affairs of this world. And that's the thing that happens a lot of times. And remember, this is kind of how he describes some here. You know, he talked about Timothy being like-minded. And then you see the kind of person that Epaphroditus was. And it was a people that would put Christ first and serve Christ. And they would give themselves in services to him. And that's the kind of soldiers that we need to be as well. And not entangle ourselves with the affairs of this world. You know, and I preached a lesson here on this. It's been a little bit ago. But, you know, there's several things that he uses the ideal of becoming entangled with. And he warns us about being entangled with. One is the old law, obviously, and the affairs of the world would be the other one. But there's several. And so, yeah, that's a good thought, Dalton. Anybody else? Then also he says, but your messenger and the one who ministered to my needs. Is that what they were doing? Is that the reason that they sent Epaphroditus to the city of Rome so that he could minister to the needs of the Apostle Paul? Wasn't that the reason that they selected him? Yeah, that's the reason that they selected him. But obviously they knew the kind of person that Epaphroditus was. And so he was a man of integrity. He was a man whom they could trust. And he's a man that they entrusted with the financial means to go and to support Paul, and so that Paul's needs could be supplied too. And so, great things that would be said about Epaphroditus in this particular text. All right, any other thoughts about verse 25? But, a person who we need to kind of imitate in our lives as well. And wouldn't it be fantastic that Paul could write about us and say this about us? This is my brother or sister in Christ. This is my fellow worker. This is my fellow soldier. This is your messenger, but this is the one that would minister to the needs of those that they had been sent to take care of. So here's a person that they entrusted this work with, and we need to be that kind of people as well. All right, any others? Look at verse 26 then. It said, since he was longing for you all and was distressed because you heard that he was sick. Now then, obviously at some point in some time that they had heard that Epaphroditus was sick. Does it tell us when they heard that? Well, no, it doesn't tell us when they heard that. Simply the fact that they heard that at some time and at some point. Did they know how sick he was, you think? All right, that's how Paul describes the sickness, but my point is, did the brethren at Philippi know that? I don't know that they knew that. And I think really what Paul is going to do is that he's writing and going to tell them how sick he really was. They had heard that he was sick. Now, they could have heard that he was sick near to death. But it seems to indicate maybe they just knew that he was sick. But Paul wants them to understand how sick he really was. And he doesn't tell us what caused the sickness. It doesn't tell us when he got sick. Could he have got sick on the journey there? Well, yeah, he could have. Could he have gotten sick after he got there? Well, yeah, he could have. Just doesn't tell us when that sickness happened or when that sickness occurred. But simply the fact that it did happen and it did occur. And of course, in this, he's writing concerning that. He's longing for you all and was distressed. It's kind of interesting. I thought when I was reading the different commentaries on this particular verse, and they talked about him being homesick, I kept thinking, well, he's longing for you all, and the word homesickness would be in the word longing, but that's not the case. Actually, the homesickness part of this is in the word distressed. And part of the definition of the word distress can carry with it the idea that they are homesick. And he was homesick. But particularly, I think, when he understood that they thought and they knew that he was sick, and he wanted them to understand that he was sick, but he was well now. And of course, Paul is going to send him to. I was reading in the class book, and it hadn't dawned on me that this is really what this is talking. And he made it a little clearer to me, at least, and my understanding of this particular text. It seems like that Paul sends Epaphroditus back maybe immediately after he gets there, or a short time after he gets there at least. And then Timothy is sent sometime later. So when he sends Epaphroditus back, if that is indeed the case, if he sends Epaphroditus back, most likely he sends this letter, and of course most everybody believes that Epaphroditus is the one that delivered the letter. And so he sends the letter with Epaphroditus, and then sometime after that he's going to send Timothy. And then of course Timothy's going to come back to him. That at least is the plan. And so that Paul knows how the Philippians obviously had received Epaphroditus back, and also their state and their well-being, and then also to let them know how Paul was doing also. And so, that's a good thought, because it seems that he's waiting to see how things, and of course he says this, how things turned out with his trial before he sent Timothy to them. So he probably sends Epaphroditus first, Timothy later, and then of course Paul does eventually make it there as well, from the best we can see and from what's said in other passages of scriptures. But they all visit the city of Philippi. But he was longing for you all. And so, now this gives the reason why, at least, why Paul is sending him back. And so he had a longing for it. The word longing is defined as to be possessed with a desire for or to long for. He wanted to be back there. Was he just homesick, you think, because of the fact of him being away from home and he wants to be back with brethren? You know, have you ever seen people like that? Have you ever been away from home, be really homesick? And the only thing you can think about is getting back home? First time I went to Russia, when I got off the plane, I think I could have kissed the ground in the United States. I said, I understand why the Pope kisses the ground now when he goes places. I said, I could have kissed the ground here when I got off that plane, I'm going to tell you. You talking about somebody homesick, now I was ready to be home. I was only gone a month, so Charles.
Yeah, when you're seriously ill, you also want to
Yeah.
people you know too.
Oh, yeah. You know, I've often said it's bad enough to be sick, and then this fellow was sick near to death, but not only was he sick and sick near to death, then he was away from home. Then that added to that, didn't it? You know, when you're sick, where do you want to be at? You want to be home, don't you? Yeah, your own bed. That's exactly right. And regardless of how sick you are, I mean, if you're sick, you want to be home. And I've been fortunate. I never have been away from home and be sick much. And so I feel fortunate in that regard. Never have been sick too much, period. But I guess the COVID-19, that's the sickest I've ever been in my entire life, I suppose. But that was sick enough. That opened my eyes how sick you can be. And so, I've been very fortunate. Never have been sick much. But here's a person that's been sent on a mission to go and to minister to Paul, and then he finds himself sick, and not only sick near to death. And here he's longing to be back home, and I think that has a lot to do with it. Is because of his sickness, wanting to be home, be around those that you love. Think of how difficult it would be to be in the city of Rome and be sick. And be a Christian. There you go. That adds to it, doesn't it? And of course, it's dangerous to be a Christian to be in that city anyway, if you're anywhere close to Nero, anyway. That's for sure. But yeah, and that's the situation that Epaphroditus finds himself in. But once again, he's a trooper and he gets better. Of course, Paul talks about the mercy of God, and God was merciful toward him, and of course toward Paul also. We'll say more about that in just a minute. But the word distress, what do you think the word distress means? He said, and was distressed because you had heard that he was sick. You've heard that, and he knew they heard that, and he knew that they knew he was sick. Don't know that they knew how sick he was, but they knew that he was sick, and so he was distressed concerning that. What does the word distress mean? Worry. All right. Concern. Full of heaviness. Okay. All right. Anguish. Okay. Yeah. You know, and all those are good terms to define that particular term. It means to faint or to be depressed and be overwhelmed with sorrow or burden of mind. That's the Complete Word Study Dictionary's definition of that particular term. But as I said, a part of this, Robertson, in his Word Pictures of the New Testament, part of his definition also covers, is defined away from home and homesick. And so that's the reason why. If you read a lot of commentaries, you'll read, now let me clarify something when I mentioned reading commentaries. That doesn't mean that it's true when you read it from a commentary, and I think you know that's what I mean. But just to remind you sometimes, I understand commentaries are written by men, and they can certainly be wrong. And the sad thing is that there's a lot of them that are wrong on numbers of passages when it comes to doctrinal issues. But issues like this, most of the time, I mean, they're all pretty well right. And but most of them will mention the idea that he was homesick. Now, the reason that they get that is because of the definition of the term itself, and that's really what it meant. But yet you can see that he was longing for them, and he was distressed. He was distressed because of what they had heard concerning him. And no doubt he wanted to be back there. Do you think he probably had family members that made up the church at Philippi? Is that within the realm of possibility? Well, that's within the realm of possibility, isn't it? But regardless, his brethren had heard that. And you can see the high regard that they had for Epaphroditus because they selected him to send him on this journey and on this mission to carry out this work. Had they entrusted him with the monetary things that was to be supplied to Paul? Did they trust him with those things? You know, there's some people that, I don't think any of us have much trouble with other Christians that trusting them with monetary things until, you know, they prove that they can't be trusted. And then, of course, if they can't be trusted, then you don't trust them. You know, there's a guy, and of course you know this, and we experienced this since I've been here. There's a guy in Zimbabwe that's asked us to send him money. Well, he's not a fellow that you could trust. And I was told that. And so he kept writing me, wanting this and that. And I said, so I just wrote him back and I said, well, you're not a person of integrity. And I said, you've taken advantage of other Christians before. And I said, he said, well, I've repented of that. I said, you may have. I said, I certainly hope that you have. But I said, until you regain the confidence of some people, I said, nobody has any confidence in you. I said, that's the problem with the sin that you were guilty of. And so we sent money, but not to him, to take care of some needs over there. We sent it to somebody else and had them to go up there and take care of it. And, of course, you remember they're the ones that took the pictures of what the concrete cost and the window panes and all those things. And they took pictures of the finished product, and, of course, it was taken care of without him ever touching the money. So, you know, but this person was a person that was a person of integrity, obviously a person that they could trust. He had a great desire to be back with them, longing, and was distressed and homesick to be back there. And as we said, because part of that at least was because of the sickness that he had. Now, this word distress is kind of an interesting word. It's only used in a couple of other places. And the other places that it was used in was when Jesus was pouring out his heart in Gethsemane. He was distressed. It's the same Greek word. And so you can see then how distressed Epaphroditus was. You see how distressed Jesus was. You remember? He said, Father, if it's possible, let this cup pass from me. He said, but nevertheless, not my will, but thine be done. And so he was distressed at that time. And this is the same Greek word describing Epaphroditus and how distressed he was. So he was, as already pointed out, he was sick, near death, and away from home. His brethren heard that, and he longed to be back with them. And so you can see the kind of person that Epaphroditus really was. All right. Any thoughts about verse 26? All right, then look at verse 27. So now Paul wants him to understand, it seems like to me. He said, for indeed he was sick, almost unto death. You know, sometimes you hear people are sick, and we don't know exactly how sick they are. But when somebody tells us how sick that they were, and they were near death, then we understand, wow, I didn't realize that they were that sick. I knew they were sick, but not that sick. Does that ever happen to you, describing people? Well, I think that's probably happened to all of us at some time or the other. So Paul wanted them to understand exactly how sick he really was. He said, but God had mercy on him. So God had mercy. He allowed him to get better. Now, and notice this. He said, and not only on him, but also on me that he had this mercy. He said, lest I should have sorrow upon sorrow. Why would have brought Paul great sorrow if something had happened to Epaphroditus in serving the Lord on this occasion? Loved him? Okay. Yeah. You know, to me, when you stop and think about that, and when you look at what Epaphroditus was doing, of how he journeyed there, he took this journey from the city of Philippi to the city of Rome, and he did that to minister to Paul. And then if something happened to him while he was there ministering to Paul, how troubling would that have been for the Apostle Paul? Well, this wouldn't happen if he hadn't come here to take care of me. But would that have entered his mind? Well, I think that's what he's talking about here. You know, if somebody came to your house and to help you at your house and they got hurt, would it upset you that they got hurt helping you or doing a favor? Or if they came there and got sick, really sick, because of something that they were exposed to at your house, would that trouble you because of that? And especially if they were near death. Well, yeah, that would be extremely troubling, I think, to any of us if that happened to us. And so I think this is what Paul was saying and pointing out here. Now, it's also interesting as you look at this. He said God had mercy on Epaphroditus and on me as well. Can we really, all healing, can we say that it's because of the mercy of God that we are better? Any healing that we have, isn't it because God's merciful to us? And he grants us a little longer maybe to live. Maybe there's something else that we need to do in life. I don't know. I don't think God has our lives just planned out. But we choose how we want to live and the things that we want to do. Now, one of the things that interests me as well in this, did Paul have miraculous powers? Well, he had that, didn't he? Why didn't he miraculously heal Epaphroditus? Yeah, that wasn't the purpose of miracles to begin with, was it? You know, that's one of the things that we can see. What was the purpose of miracles? Yeah, to confirm the word. That those that were speaking, that they were speaking what God wanted them to say. And that wasn't the purpose behind it. We see on several different occasions, and sometimes we don't understand why that. Tony's made mention of this on several different occasions. You know, James was beheaded, and Peter was let out of prison. And so sometimes tragic things happen to one and another one's delivered. Why? Well, I don't know why. The Lord doesn't tell us why, but we see that. Dalton?
Thinking about this makes me think that even though they had the power to work miracles, God did not give it to them. You have to make the decisions themselves in regard to things like this. I think that the miracle to heal somebody that's sick actually was given by God.
Right.
And Paul or the other apostle having to make a decision. Do I do this here, or am I supposed to do it this way?
And if that's the case, then they could only use them when God wanted them to use them. Right. Yeah. So, yeah. I don't doubt that at all. So, yeah. Any other thoughts, Tony?
I thought about what we're talking about.
Mm-hmm.
James being beheaded.
Yeah.
And then Dorcas, this poor little widow lady,
Yeah.
died. And James was not raised today, but the poor little widow lady was raised
Yeah.
today.
And there's several things just like that. I mean, you know, Peter was arrested, and of course Peter was released, and James wasn't released. He was beheaded. Dorcas was raised, and obviously James was not raised. And so, you know, there's several things just like that scattered throughout Old and New Testament. Some things that we don't always have good answers for, but that's God's decision, and but God's merciful to all of us. You know, if we go to heaven when life is over, is that are we better off going on and go to heaven rather than having to stay here and to suffer maybe? Well, if you want to look at it that way, James would have been the one that would have been really blessed because he went on and he's in paradise. He's in Abraham's bosom. He didn't have to concern himself with that anymore. And so, you know, that's one of the ways I think that we have to look at it as well. Tony?
Another thing that was came to mind as you said that, God being merciful to all of us. David Maxson had a lesson, or mostly sometime in the last week or so, talking about Ahab, and there was no king in Israel.
Yes, I read that.
Wicked as Ahab.
All right.
But God, at the end of Ahab's reign, because Ahab repented of some of the things he had done, God showed him mercy.
Yeah.
And God will show us mercy if we will.
Yeah, and too, I read that as well, and certainly God is merciful to even people who are extremely wicked and vile, and He does show mercy to them. Now, Him showing mercy doesn't always, His mercy doesn't always include extended life, but it can be the forgiveness of sins, and that's the greatest mercy that can be shown toward us, is that we can be forgiven of our sins to have hope of living eternally with God. So, yeah. His mercy is there. His mercy is from everlasting to everlasting. It's sometimes beyond our comprehension of why He allows that. Go ahead.
And I know this is what you mean, clarify, that God doesn't just part like forgive us of our sins.
Yeah.
He extends the mercy to allow us
That's right.
to repent and turn from
Yeah.
it. And I don't think Ahab ever did. I think Ahab went off.
Well, even if he forgave him at that time, it's probably that he went right back into those same kind of sins and stuff. And there's a question whether or not that was, that did indeed happen. So yeah, he did show that. Fern?
Crossed my mind with him being distressed.
Uh-huh.
Maybe today, when we get sick, we pick up a phone.
Yeah.
The person's almost dead. Well, he gets better tomorrow.
Yeah.
We can call and say he's better.
Yeah.
But with them, they have to wait till someone comes.
Yeah.
Back.
Yeah.
So he could have been getting better. He could have got better.
Yeah.
And he was distressed because he couldn't get word to him and tell him, I'm better from where we are.
Well, I think that's the case. And just as you said, yeah, we can communicate quickly by phone or by text or whatever the case might be. But they didn't have that way and means to do that. And so it would take a time for them to get that information. They had information that he was sick. They didn't have information that he was well. And I think there's a good possibility that they didn't really know how sick he was. And I think that's the reason why Paul is supplying this information. Yes, he was sick, but not only was he sick, but he was near death. That's how sick he really was. And for them to know that. He wanted them to know that and to understand that. And so that's one of the reasons that Paul is sending him back. And I think this is the reason why he was so longing for and so distressed, that he knew that they knew that. Now, I don't know how he knew that, but, information gets there. It's just kind of slow. But he knew that they knew that. So all the kind of information, all the information not supplied to us exactly how they knew and how he knew that. But apparently they obviously did. All right. Any other thoughts about this? All right. Now he said not only did he have mercy on him, but he had mercy upon me. And as we said, we're talking about the miraculous measures of the Spirit. One of the things that, as we mentioned, Mark 16 verses 20 is a passage that you need to remember. This is the reason why miracles were given to begin with, is to confirm the words that would be spoken. But also understand in 1 Corinthians 13 and verses 10 that they were only there for a brief period of time. And the period of time was until that which is perfect is come, then that which is in part would be done away with. So understand, those are two vital verses of understanding the miraculous measures of the Spirit. It wasn't just so people could restore their life and so brethren could use it to restore their life. No, it was given to confirm the words that they would speak. It was only given for a period of time until the perfect revelation of God's will was completed, and then certainly they would be done away with. We still hear people today that say that they have the miraculous measure of the Spirit. How do you answer that? What do you say to them? Boy, that's what I say all the time. I'm with you, Charles. I went to one time years ago, was in a meeting in Mickells, Kentucky, and I was supposed to meet with a guy. He was a Pentecostal preacher, and he made a claim that his thumb was pulled out and pulled off, and he put it back, and it was just fine. So I said that they told me, he said, now you have to sit and listen. They said, now you can't say anything. I'm thinking, yeah, right. I'm going to sit here and listen to this, and you think I'm not going to say anything? So I didn't say yes, or I didn't say no when they said that to me. But he never did mention that. He never did mention anything about that, anything really that you disagree with. But we discussed some other things. But I found that kind of interesting. Some people try to tie your hands behind your back and don't want you to say anything, huh? That's not going to happen. So, but anyway, I'm like Charles. Somebody that claims to have that, I said, let's go to the cemetery. You raise somebody from the dead, and when you do that, then I'll believe that you have it. Or when you can heal somebody of some sickness that's visible, that I can see, that I know that they were really sick. There's a lot of people that they claim to be that, and claim to be able to do that, but obviously that's not the case. That which is perfect has come. That which is part of it. Tony.
Obviously, that's an effective answer, because that's what gendered the belief of all the people in the New Testament time. They didn't have word. They had these men that were going around doing all these miracles, telling them about the story of Jesus, who was raised from the dead, the Son of God. I
Yeah, and the miracles that they would perform would confirm what they had just said, and that was that Christ did rise from the dead. And so it gives us hope as well. Sorry. No? You sure? Go ahead.
My dad was in a discussion with a supposed miracle worker,
Uh-huh.
and they got real heated over it, and the guy reached over and slapped him hard on the side of his head, trying to puncture the eardrums.
Oh, that's pretty bad. Isn't it? That's going to a little extreme, wasn't it? Oh. You don't hear that quite as much as you used to. Do you hear that? I don't hear of it quite as, nothing like I used to. I guess if you watch some of the TV evangelists, you might still see that. Old Ernest Ainsley used to pop people in the head, and of course they catch them, they would fall out, and I don't know how many. Several of you here hadn't heard me tell this story. We had a guy in Nashville who was a member of the church there, and he used to work for security. And when they first opened up where the Predators play, one of the first things that was there was Benny Hinn. He was the first person that used that auditorium, I think, at that time. And I think it was where the Predators are playing, or one of the new ones anyway. And so he worked for security there, and so before they opened the doors and let everybody in, they made an announcement over the loudspeaker, said everybody's supposed to be in wheelchairs, go get in your wheelchairs now. And so, that's how Benny Hinn worked. So, and of course, one of our members was there, heard it on the loudspeakers. And so, I said, well, that sounds about par for the course right there. And yet people believe that, and they have, and really people want to believe that, and they're really grasping for something because most of the time they're sick or they have somebody that's sick, and they'll do almost anything to be healed, and that's not going to happen. So, all right, any other thoughts? All right, then look at verse 28. He said, therefore I send him the more eagerly, that when you see him again you may rejoice, and that I may be less sorrowful. And so it seems, of course, obviously that he's going to send him now. And of course, maybe that is indeed the case. And I don't dispute what Brother Hartwrighter said at all. And then later he's going to send Timothy. But he's sending Epaphroditus back now. He said, therefore I send him the more eagerly. And the reason being is because of what's said in verses 27 as well. They had heard that he was sick. They probably didn't know how sick he really was. He was sick near to death, and really he was sick like that because he came there to render services to the Apostle Paul. And he said that when you see him again, you may rejoice, and I may be less sorrowful. So really what Paul is doing, he's doing what's right and what's beneficial to all the parties that are involved. Was it for the good of Epaphroditus that he sent him back? Well, it was for Epaphroditus' good. Was it for the good of the brethren at Philippi that Epaphroditus is sent back? Well, it was for their good as well. And was it for Paul's good as well, so that he could be less sorrowful? I find it less sorrowful that he was sorrowful regardless of the situation or the circumstances about Epaphroditus. It was pretty bad to be in prison in Rome. But here a church had sent an individual to administer to Paul's needs, and he gets sick. Whether he was sick on the way or he got sick there, he was not only sick, he was near death. And of course the sorrow that would cause Paul is something tragic that if it did happen to him. But here he said, I'll be less sorrowful, knowing that Epaphroditus is going to get to go back there. He's homesick. He's wanting to get back home. He'd been sick. The brethren had heard that he was sick, and so he was doing what was in the best interest of all parties, and that would be Epaphroditus, those at Philippi, and of course Paul himself. And not only there was a source of probably the sickness would be some sort of physical sickness, but there was the mental anguish that was associated with that as well. It was extremely troubling. Which is the worst, to be physically sick or mentally or emotionally distraught? Or are they both bad? They're both bad, aren't they? That's right. Mental anguish can cause you to be sick physically, can't it? And I know of those kind of things happening. And so that's very easily for that to happen to an individual. So, yeah, it can be very, very troubling. So here he was sick physically, it seems like, and then there was the mental anguish of him knowing that they knew that he was sick, but they didn't know that he was well. And so here Paul is making a choice for the betterment of all. All right, any thoughts? Charles?
I know it's understood, but I think it needs to be stated the selflessness of Paul of looking at sending the Epaphroditus away as a good thing. Whereas, if you're selfish, it's no, I need it.
And it would have been easy for him to do that, wouldn't it? I mean, because he could have used him, apparently. And I think really that's what the church at Philippi meant to happen as well. I think that's the reason why they selected him, that he was a man of integrity, obviously, but he was also a man that would be willing to serve. He talked about their lack of service, and we'll talk about that in just a moment. But he went there to serve Paul, and it almost seems like that they expected him to stay there, obviously longer than what he's staying there, but now he's sending him back, and he's immediately sending him back, it seems like. When he gets well enough to travel, he's going to send him back. Now, how long he was sick, how long he was there, I don't know. But it seems like that there's a good possibility that they expected him to stay longer, and this is what Paul is telling them in verse, verse 29. And well, as we can see, because of what he says to them there. Paul could have been selfish, could have demanded that he stayed, but he wasn't. He was a very unselfish individual. Like I said, he's doing what's best. I think he thought what was best for Epaphroditus, also for the brethren at Philippi, and how it would cause him less sorrow by going ahead and sending him back to them, and so that they could receive him. All right. Any other thoughts, Tony?
I might be repeating some of what Carl said, but I didn't hear everything he said. But a lot of times the lesson for us is that you're right, you're doing what's best for all of us.
Yeah.
But, if you said in Paul's case, he could have just written the letter and said, oh, he's doing fine, he's doing well, I still need here. And justify that to himself by saying, now they don't have to worry about it. I told him he's all right.
Yeah.
That's what we do a lot of times. It's
Yeah.
justify to ourselves, well, we're doing the right thing, but
Yeah.
we're really doing the right thing for us, not for
Yeah.
others.
Well, that's kind of what Charles was talking about. And Paul was very unselfish in what he did do for Epaphroditus and for the brethren at Philippi as well. Dalton?
What came into play here was something that we've seen in, the contemplation of the dead. Philip went there the first time and said, I won't believe it unless I see it myself. And there's some people that they can't be comforted until they actually see
Yeah.
the situation. How sick was he? Will, you're saying he was sick. He's better now. Is he? And some people cannot be satisfied or
Yeah.
worried relieved until they actually see it for themselves.
Well, and I think that's the case that Dalton was talking about, that some people are not relieved until they actually get to see them personally. And I think that's true with most of us. We hear that, but, I really want to see that with my own eyes. And, there's been things in my life that I've said the same thing. I hear you talk about this, but I want to see this. I want to see this for myself. And it's not that you really doubt what they've said, but you just want to be an eyewitness to the fact. And I think certainly that's probably the case here. All right, any other thoughts down through verse 28? Joe? Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
We have to be careful, even when it's not sure.
Yep.
We can be deceived and tricked in our eyes.
Yeah, and understand there's a difference between magic and then between things that truly happen and real miracles that could happen as well. I've seen some things that illusionists do. I went to see David Copperfield one time, and I was blown away. Does anybody know David Blaine? Anybody know David Blaine? Hold up your hand. Anybody heard David Blaine? Okay. A few of you do. he's one of the most amazing guys I guess I've ever seen. I mean, he can do things right before people's eyes. That's just mind-boggling. But there's a difference between illusions and things that actually happen. He understands that, and he explains that. But, some people will try to use that, religiously speaking, to deceive people. And, that's the thing that we have to be extremely careful about, because we understand what 1 Corinthians 13 says. When that which is perfect is come, then that which is in part would be done away with. And the part that he was talking about that would be done away with in the text, chapter 12, also in chapter 14, was miraculous gifts and the use of miraculous gifts. And so that's the reason that they were given, was to confirm the word, and they would soon pass. But they can be very deceiving, and obviously. And people are deceived. Tony?
That was Simon's sword for sin.
Yeah.
He had been used in illusions to deceive people, and now he saw
The real thing. Yeah. Yeah, he wanted to buy it. And really what he wanted to buy was the ability to lay hands on other people that they could receive that gift. I always found that kind of interesting, that's what he wanted. He wanted the ability to impart that to other people. But, Peter condemned him for that and told him to repent and pray and ask for forgiveness. He said, pray for me. So he understood the sin that he was guilty of. But yeah, that's a good point as well. Any others? Look at verse 29, and we'll talk a little bit about this, and we'll probably finish this up Wednesday night and get to the questions in the book. It said, receive him therefore from the Lord with all gladness, and hold such men in esteem. Now then, the question that I want to ask you is, if they were longing to see Epaphroditus, or he was longing to see them, and he was concerned that they had heard that he had been sick, now, why is it that Paul has to write and tell them to receive him? Charles?
I wondered about that, and one possibility is if he returned early, they might hold it against him for not really his mission.
And I think that's really the key to this, and that's the reason why I said what I said a little bit ago. I think there's a real possibility that when Epaphroditus was sent from Philippi to the city of Rome, that they fully expected him to stay for a period of time. Now, I don't know how long a period of time it was, but it would have been longer than what he had spent there. And so that's the reason why Paul is writing this letter. He said, now he was sick. So not only was he sick, Paul wants him to understand how sick he was. He was sick near death, and he's sending him back. He said, now I want you to receive him back. He's done what you sent him to do. He's delivered the financial means and taken care of me. He's fulfilled that. He's fulfilled what you couldn't. He said, now what they couldn't do, he did it in person. They couldn't do these things in person. So they actually selected Epaphroditus and sent Epaphroditus. This would be like us and all of us. All you guys and some of you ladies that are working public work, still doing public work. You couldn't just drop what you're doing and take off for several months. When you got back, you wouldn't have a job, would you? And you couldn't support your family. So not everybody could do that. But all of us can supply some monetary means, some money to someone, and select someone here to send them on the mission. You can do that, can't you? All of us can do that. It may be little, it may be very little, it may be a lot that you could give. But not everybody could go. Epaphroditus was the one that could go. And I think that's probably the reason why he's telling him to receive him back, because he did do what he was sent to do. All right, any thoughts? We'll talk a little bit more about that, Lord willing, Wednesday night. Okay, appreciate it. Thank you.